Well, as we begin today, I want to start by telling you about what's coming next. Our lives are built on relationships. And even though relationships are the most basic building block of life, they're not the most simple part, are they? Can I get an amen? Relationships, the best amen I've had in a while, relationships can be very challenging. And it requires us to be able to discern how God can help us to have wisdom within relationships to build them into all they need to be. And so here's the thing. Our next sermon series that we're going to is called We. And we are going to cover all kinds of relationships that are closest to your life during that sermon series. And so here's what we want you to do. We want you to invite like crazy in your oikos. And what does oikos mean? What does oikos mean? That's right, my world. And every person in your world has some kind of challenge in their relationship. And so they need to be here and be a part of that. So here's what I'm going to tell you. The weekend of the 19th and the 20th of September is the beginning of this series, and we are just going to pack the place out. And so let me just say to you, South Campus and all the people here at Mechanicsville are going to rejoice as I say this. As you were already told this morning by your pastor, on September 20th is your first weekend of going to double services, 9 a.m. and 11 a.m., and you're going to pack it out with We, and we're all celebrating here for you at the Mechanicsville campus. We know you're packing in. I know it's Labor Day, so I don't know how full you are there at the moment, but we know you've been packing in as a rule. And so what a great way to fill two services that morning and to just see God begin to work. So invite people to the We series. Now today we're wrapping up our Balanced series, and let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 6. It says this beginning in verse 6 of Timothy chapter 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we'll be content with that. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. If there ever was an employee that deserved immediate retirement and absolute praise, lifetime pension granted immediately, it's the guy who came up with Happy Meals. In 1977, Dick Brahms was a regional manager in the St. Louis area, and he said, wouldn't it be neat if we could market a meal especially for kids, and we'll call it Happy Meals. Now, you know what? McDonald's should have just bought him a house in the Caribbean the next day and retired him. It was so successful. In fact, McDonald's has sold 20 billion Happy Meals over the years. But now, here's the trick. Where did they get the name Happy Meals? Does it make the kid happy? I mean, what is it? It's like a little hamburger and a few fries and a drink and a dime store toy, right? And you're like, this is a Happy Meal. Come on, you should be happy. And kids are for 45 seconds till it breaks. And so I was thinking the other day, why is it called a Happy Meal? And all of a sudden it dawned on me, if you look at the picture on the screen, you'll understand why they call it a Happy Meal. Because Ronald McDonald is happy to take your money to the bank. He's the one who's happy about Happy Meals. He's loving it. Today, as we wrap up, I want to share with you one of the secrets to happiness. Even deeper, one of the secrets to joy. And it is found in this combination. Are you ready? You want one of the secrets to joy in life? Here it is. Godliness with contentment is great gain. I want you to read that with me. Godliness with contentment is great gain. This is what he says to us. The combo of serving God and being content with whatever he gives you, that is gain. Now, this is an important place to start because usually if we're talking about finances and we use the word gain, our natural assumption would be that the concept is more, right? We're talking about finances and the word is gain. So we would say, okay, the way to contentment is by having more. But the passage that we read today says this: the secret to contentment is not the word more. The secret to contentment is the word enough. In fact, it says, if we have food and drink, that will be enough. Here's our problem. In our American culture today, we don't think food and drink is enough. We think there's a way to greater happiness by further acquisition. And so the enemy of contentment of our souls can be at times this concept of more. I need more. But let me remind you, this text says more will not be the source of gain in your life. In fact, become too enamored with the idea of more, and it can get you in trouble really fast. Proverbs 27:20 says it this way: hell and decay are never satisfied, and a person's eyes are never satisfied. In other words, dissatisfaction is like your own little piece of hell on earth. If we spend our life dissatisfied, we will never find the great gain that comes from the combination of serving God and being content with what he has given us. Do you remember when we had TVs that looked like this? You remember those TVs? Some of you might say, it looks like my living room. Did you get a picture of my living room? What'd you do, And that, we were content with that for a long time. But then one day, someone told us about a flat screen TV, right? Because here's the thing. One of the ways we become dissatisfied is we get focused on the wrong thing. We become aware that there's something we don't have that we could have. And so we say, you know what? I used to be okay with that TV, but every time I try to move it, I got to go to the chiropractor after I do. And now I was at my neighbor's house the other day, and they had this wonderful thing a few years ago, right? It was new a few years ago. They had a flat screen. I didn't know TVs could look like that. I didn't know you could get a TV you could mount to the wall. And now what do? It's like thinner. My TV's thinner than yours. My TV has more pixels per whatever than yours does, right? You see what happens? At some point, dissatisfaction comes upon us because we become aware by looking all around at what other people have of what we don't have. You mean TVs can look like that? You mean someone could have a car where the seats heat up? Where my buns can get toasty in February? I don't have a car like that. I didn't know they could make ceiling heights that high in a living room. I didn't know you could have countertops made of that. And so we artificially create need in our lives. And need makes us feel like we are missing out. I was content with that car that had 150,000 miles on it and had a few rips in the seats, and I had to twist the knob just to get the radio to run. But then the other day I saw the car that my neighbor has. And now I'm not so thrilled with mine. Let me show you the comparison of the two differing mentalities here. The first one from 6:8 is what we shared with you. If we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. But here's the opposite mentality. People who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destructions. Somehow, in pursuing possessions, thinking that's the way to joy, we can wind up trapped by them. Now stop and think about that for a moment today, because when we use the word trapped as it refers to possessions, usually we're referring to it for those who don't have enough possessions. We might use the term, they've been trapped in a cycle of poverty. But this verse says, get too sold on acquiring more and more and more, and you might find yourself trapped by your wealth. Because we forget that contentment is the goal. And that contentment is great gain. In fact, let me show you this to you in a way, because I think we assume, I've been guilty of assuming this before. If I could have a little more, I think my contentment level would increase a little bit. If I could just have this or that, I would like having that. And so we assume that if we just get a little more, we'll get a little happier. So I want to test that theory today, and we'll just do it in a way that's kind of anecdotal. I want you to think back. This will be especially for those of you who are old enough, you've hit middle age or older, but for anybody, you can do this. I want you to think back in your life fiscally. So I don't want you to think about the happiness events of your life, like getting married or having children or finishing your degree or those type things. I just want you to think about financially for a minute. I want you to think about times when you didn't have very much. And I want you to think about times when you've had more or even a lot. And think for a minute, when were you happiest? Was there a time you look back and go, man, I remember that time. I just remember being so content. If you're anything like me, as I was thinking that through, do you know what popped into my mind? Diane and I were first married. We were in married apartments at college, cinder block apartments. We didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. We had just enough to pay for the rent and the food and all of that. And sometimes our date night would be about 8 o'clock to drive to McDonald's, split a medium fry and a couple cups of ice water, because that's what we could afford. And every now and then we'll be riding down the road and we'll look at each other and laugh and say, do you remember when all we could afford was a medium fry to share and 2 ice waters? Those were great days. Look, I'm not saying they're not great days now. I'm not saying that my life isn't full of contentment now, but what I am saying is this simply means you can't equate contentment with more. You can't do it. In fact, since he said we can become trapped by our possessions, have you ever felt trapped by what you owned? Have you ever just gotten tired of washing it and storing it and cleaning it and maintaining it and repairing it and organizing it and storing it and watching over it and locking it up so that no one steals it? Have you ever just gone, I've got so much stuff, it's driving me nuts? It's true. It's true. Let me show you a famous Bible verse that Paul said from Philippians 4. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty, and I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. In case you're wondering if Paul really knows what he's talking about or he's just blowing hot air at us, when Paul wrote this passage to Philippi, he was in jail. Paul wasn't watching whether or not his 401k was increasing. Paul wasn't thinking about whether he could add another car to his garage. And Paul says there's a way to live life that is great gain. And it's not found in searching for your next dollar. It's found longing in things that are so much better. Because here's the thing I want you to catch. If happiness is not to be found in focusing on the things around us that we can acquire, then contentment actually is found when we focus ourselves on things that are much more important. In other words, stop cruising car lots wishing you could afford this year's model. Stop spending your energy looking at catalogs, wishing you could buy those new clothes. Get rid of screen envy for your neighbor's new 4K curved, high-def monstrosity of a television. And instead, become discontent with your lack of intimacy with God. Become unsatisfied with the number of Bible verses you know. Decide your prayer life isn't good enough, and you're going to seek God harder than you ever have before. Decide that the sum total of the number of people in your oikos that you have invited to church or told about Jesus this past year was not enough, and you're not content with it. And there's your discontentment. There's what you're ready to focus on. There's what you're ready to say, oh, if these things would but be added to my life, how much my contentment would increase. Because these are the things that bring value into our lives. So he goes on with the warning, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant or to put their hope in wealth, which is uncertain, but put their hope in who? God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Don't miss that. We're going to talk about that. He provides it for our enjoyment. Command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Let's jump from this passage to wind this sermon up. Paul says, if you flip this thing on its ear, become content when others are not. Stop chasing contentment in the usual place that Americans do. He says, now you're talking. Now something good is in front of you. In fact, I want to call it this: how to live large by living a little smaller. How to really live large by living a little smaller. We're in 10-10-80, and we're saying we're not going to use it all for how we live. So here's what they are. 3 things. Number 1, enjoy what you have. Say that with me. Come on, say it to someone next to you right now. Come on, let me hear you all the way from South Campus. Enjoy what you have. You know what? God doesn't want you to be guilty because he's blessed you. He wants you to be grateful. He wants you to be grateful. Yeah, when we were down in Cuba, one of the days of this youth conference that we were doing, they went to the beach. Now, when Cubans go to the beach, they don't get to go to the white sand beaches that the Canadian tourists and all them go to. They go to the locals' beaches, but still, it was still a beautiful place to be. And they had a basketball court there, and after I shared a devotional with them, we went up, and a bunch of them started to play basketball. And I walked over to see what they were playing, and they were playing basketball with a half-inflated soccer ball. And among 60 teenagers and all the adults there, they were playing with that ball because that's the only ball they had. But can I tell you something? They were having so much fun. And Cubans aren't any better at basketball than I am. But they were having so much fun. You know, it didn't matter to them. And our group, of course, is sitting over there. Well, we were playing with them, but then when the game ended, we went over and we had this little list we were running. It was like basketballs, soccer balls, inflation needles, pumps. We're just starting to write the list of all the stuff we're bringing back next time, like I told you about last weekend. We just added that to the list. But you know what? They didn't care because they were so thankful for the ball they had. Have you stopped and thanked God for what you have lately? Have you driven down the road and said, thanks God for this car because it gets me to work most days? Have you ever said, yeah, it has a couple stains, but this old coat really keeps me warm, and it feels good tonight? Have you ever said, well, this old couch isn't quite as comfy as it used to be, but haven't we made some wonderful family memories on it? Have you ever said to yourself, it's better to eat from chipped dishes in a household of love than to eat from fine china where there's hatred and jealousy? That sounds like a proverb, doesn't it? I think I'm going to add that to my own book of Proverbs somewhere. And then underneath it'll say ID, i.e., no one really wants to be the Kardashians anyway. It's a modern version. You get it, right? God's provided us things. And it's not so that we should regret it and feel guilty about it. So long as you are not materialistic in your mindset, be grateful for what he's given you. Be filled with thankfulness. Here's the second one then. Be generous with what you have. Let me give you a secret that someone taught to my wife and I years ago, a godly pastor, and I've never forgotten it, neither has my wife, and it's this. He said, be grateful for everything God gives you, but hold on to it loosely. Hey, someone ought to write that down. Be grateful for everything God gives you, but hold on to it loosely. We sing that song around here, don't we? You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, blessed be your name. So God, thank you for that car. And if you take it away tomorrow, I'll be glad for when I had it. And God, thank you for that job. But if you take it away tomorrow, I'll be glad for when I had it. God, thank you for everything you have provided. I won't live in fear of losing it because I'm holding on to it loosely. And so on top of that, I'll also be generous with it. I told you last weekend that not everything you earn is for today. This weekend, I want to remind you that not everything you earn is for you. And oh, that God would give us a heart of generosity. Some of you are like, I don't have any disposable income, Pastor Todd. I can live out 10-10-80, and it's going to just be so crazy for me to try to figure out how to do that. Can I tell you something? There are ways we can be generous with what we've got. We can share a meal with somebody. We can invite someone in for that. We can lend people something that we have that's going to be helpful to them. We can just say, hey, you take this. You use this. It'll be great. In fact, I breathe deep before I say this. Let me give you just a little piece of insight. If there's anything in this world you own that you love it so much that you say, I could never lend that out, you better ask yourself about how much you love that thing. If you say, I couldn't lend that out because someone might chip it. Someone might dent it. Someone might break it. And I know it could maybe help somebody, but don't you understand how precious that thing is to me? Then I just need to say, yes, it's more precious to you than that person is. It got quiet down here. I remember lending a car out to my niece, and I probably shouldn't tell you which one it was, but it was Meredith. Those of you who remember Meredith. For those of you who do not know, our niece served here in our children's ministry a few years ago. But anyhow, lent our car out to Chris and Meredith. We were going away, and they were having car trouble. I said, just use our blue car. And so they did. We were gone over a weekend, and when we came back, Meredith gave me the keys back. She said, here's your car. I said, thank you. She said, oh, by the way, I kind of backed into a pole while I had it. So you need to take a look at it and see what we need to do. And I said, Meredith, I'm sure it's fine. And so I wasn't really sure, but so she stayed in the house, and I went out and I looked, and I went to the back, and my car's got like yours does. The bumpers are so much plastic anymore, just kind of bounce around. Just this little rip in the paint there. Then I went around the side, and the side panel, they're supposed to, all those panels are supposed to all line up nice, right? You look down, the side panel just sticking out a wee little bit. And I pushed on it, it stayed in for a second, then went boop, popped back in, boop, 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 right? I went in, I'm walking in, I'm like saying, what kind of deductible do they have? Who's going to pay? I'm walking in, and I'm so glad. I'm just so glad to tell you today. The Holy Spirit just said to me, Todd, that is nothing. And I went in to Meredith and said, I don't see anything that's a problem. And so now every time I go by my car, I'll see that little panel, and I'll push it in, and it goes boop, 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 boop. It's just, Meredith, how are you? I hope you're doing well. God bless Meredith wherever she is, Hopefully she's more careful nowadays with her own car, but you know what? Because you know what? It's just a thing. It's just a thing. I got worse things on that car than that anyhow. It just doesn't really matter. So enjoy what you have and be generous with what you have. Here's the last one. Make long-term investments. Make long-term investments. I told you a while back, when you leave this world, you're taking nothing with you, right? Remember, I said the casket's no bigger than you are, and there's a reason for that. You're taking nothing with you. And so what we do is we send it on ahead. That's what Jesus said. The only thing we ever get to send ahead, folks, is the difference we have made in this world. What we've given, how we've invested our time and our effort. This isn't just about money right now. how we've invested our time and our life and our love and what we've done for the glory of God. That's all that goes on ahead. And here's what Jesus said. He said, store up that stuff like it's treasure in heaven. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you really think about that, you're like, why would I need to store treasure in heaven? If I'm in heaven, how great is it going to be? I mean, I hate to bust your bubble, but I hope none of you are thinking that what Jesus meant was, send your bling ahead. Because we're going to walk around heaven and be impressed by your bling compared to mine, right? Man, I got this when I helped out the homeless guys. You know what I mean? That's not how it's going to be. In fact, I'm quite certain. And when Jesus says store up your treasure in heaven, it's not the kind of things we normally call treasures. And here's why I'm pretty certain of that. When you look at the things that God treasures most in this world, it's not treasure. The things we treasure most in this world, I think the things more sweet to me than anything are the presence of God and being used by God. What if those are the treasures in heaven? Pastor Todd has zero proof. No, I don't have zero proof of this. I have a few verses that say this. But I don't have the perfect heaven theology for you today. Can't explain how it's going to work. But this is what Jesus did say. He said, if I can trust you with little things on earth, like time and money and wealth, if I can trust you with those little things, well, welcome into your rest because I'm going to entrust you with bigger things. I think that's going to be like? That's going to be like in heaven when God says, I can entrust you with greater revelation of who I am. I can entrust you with a nearness and a closeness. And then this, are you ready for this? And I've got some stuff for you to do with me. Look, as best I can read the Bible, that's what the treasures in heaven are. We aren't going to stand around being impressed by streets of gold. We're going to be impressed by God. Take the L out. We're going to be impressed by God. And then what we did with what we had here will determine what all that is like. Let me tell you, if this sounds selfish, you'll have to forgive me, but I want to make long-term investments because Jesus told me to. So that's not selfish. That's just obedience. Well, when we first moved to Maryland, my TV looked like that. And I remember that I was wanting to buy a TV when we moved here, and those who moved me in kind of wished I had before we moved. But I remember going to my wife, and I said, honey, I've been thinking about it, and I'd kind of like to get a flat-screen TV for the house. And my wife doesn't care a lot about TV. I don't either, but I said, it's not just a want, it's a necessity. And she said, what do you mean it's a necessity? I said, football season starts in 3 weeks. It's a necessity. It didn't compute with her at all. She did not find that funny. But so I told her, here's the deal. I'd like to get a flat-screen TV, and you know that I don't buy things fast. She says it takes me 6 months to agree to buy the right toaster. I just don't buy fast. So I said, I've been doing some research, and I've been setting aside a little bit of money as we go, saving like we should. And so when I have enough, can I get a flat-screen TV? She said, it's fine with me. Let's do that. So I had found the perfect one. It was a 37-inch flat screen. Walmart was selling it. They had it on at a really good price. And I finally had all my money saved up for it. Well, it worked out perfect. We had to go over to Delaware for some things. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to call over to Walmart in Delaware. Do you know why I wanted to buy it in Delaware? You all know that. There's no sense. There's nothing cooler than buying a 99-cent Big Gulp in Delaware, and you still don't have to break the dollar for tax. It's awesome. So that's way off story. So anyhow, we go over. The day is there. I've got I think it was about $300 at that time for a TV like that. Got my $300 I saved up. We go over to Delaware. I'm all excited. We go into Walmart. This is the day I've been preparing for. I'm going to get my TV. And so she's like, you go do the TV thing. I don't care. I'm going to go over probably to women's clothing is probably where she was going. And so she goes over there. So I go, and so I need a cart, get the TV. So I find it. Yeah, they got the TV I want. So I go back to the back room doors, and I knock. I was like, one of those flatbed carts? So yeah, sure. So guy gives me a flatbed cart. I'm rolling that noisy thing. They're always noisy. You clunk, clunk, clunk. I'm rolling that thing along. And I'm walking from those doors over to the TVs. And on the way, between the TVs and the doors was the shoe section. Now, I got to tell you, I pay no attention to the shoe section. I hate dealing with shoes. I know I pay no attention to the shoe section. But that day, I stopped dead. I stopped walking, and I looked at all those shoes. And the reason I looked at all those shoes was just a few months before that, just before we moved here, when we were at our church in Delaware, I'd gone on a mission trip. We'd gone to the Dominican Republic. And there in the Dominican Republic, we had men who were building on a church. And in that town, what we had also done is we had hauled in suitcases full of shoes and sneakers. Some of them brand new, some of them barely used. And we were going to have a ministry where we were going to go into the town and hand out shoes and sneakers and all this. And so one day, some of the ladies stayed back in the hotel room while the guys went to the work site, and they started to sort out. I mean, we brought suitcases and suitcases of shoes. And they started sorting them all out, laying them all on the ledges and laying them on the bed, and laying them on the floor, sorting them by size and type and women's and men's and all that. And as they were laying there all sorted out, there was a knock on their door, and they opened it up, and it was the maid. And you should have seen her eyes. They tell me the story. You should have seen her eyes when she looked at it and saw hundreds of pairs of shoes. One of the ladies there who was part of our team speaks Spanish and began to speak to the maid, and the maid told her, I have children who need to go to school, but they are not allowed to go to school without shoes, and I don't think I'm going to be able to make enough money to buy them shoes. Is there any chance I could get shoes for my children? And they brought her in, and it was like shopping, you know. Said, find just the right ones, and she took those home. The maid came back the next day. She said, by chance, you don't happen to have a Spanish Bible, do you? And we did. We had brought those too. And so they gave her a Spanish Bible. She came back the next day. This story is all recounted to me by the ladies who were there. And what the lady said, she came back the next day and she walked in and she said, my husband and I didn't even go to bed last night. We stayed up and we just couldn't stop reading the Bible. Amen. And that day, those women from my church led that young lady to Christ. She went home and led her husband to Christ. The two of them ended up becoming a major part of that building there that we had built. They became a major part of that church, and last I knew, they were leading a small group out of their little home as a part of that church. That is the story that was running through my head as I was toting my little cart heading to get my TV. And I got caught by the shoe department. And suddenly I asked myself, what could I do with $300 if just buying shoes can make that much difference in someone's life? I tried to set that thought aside, kept pushing the cart, but I couldn't do it. Took the cart back. I'm good. Head to the front, bumped into my wife. Said, where's your TV? Said, it's a long story. I'll tell you in the car. We went home. Found a way to invest that money in missions. Now I want to tell you something. The day has come since then that I've gotten a flat screen TV. For the little bit of TV we watch in our house, we have way too many. So I'm not here telling you today that I've never gotten a TV, but this is what I am telling you. The Spirit of God nudged my heart and said, here's what I want you to do in this moment with this money. And I didn't dare disobey. And what a blessing has come into my life because I got to participate in the work of God. 4 weeks now, we're done, we're wrapped up. We've been talking balanced. How's your balance? Are you giving? Have you put God first? Are you saving? Are you realizing that God is giving you the capacity to store up for the future? And are you willing to live large by living on a little less? If so, then the promise I made in the first sermon will come true. And that is, there it will be a blessing and a strength and a relief in your life like you have never known by living balanced in your finances. Would you bow your head with me?